Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining this webinar exploring how beauty and fashion brands are evolving their commerce strategies and adapting to new customer behaviors and demands. Following this discussion, we'll have some time for a Q&A, so please take advantage of that. You don't have to wait until the end to submit your questions. You can add them at any point during the session through the Questions tab on the GoToWebinar platform. Everyone registered will also get a recording of this webinar in their inbox tomorrow, should you miss anything or want to revisit any part of the conversation. So today's guests are Stacy Mackler, Global Strategic Communications Executive and a 25-year veteran of the beauty and personal care industry. Stacy has experience on the agency and in-house side, including leading communications for beauty brands Clinique and Lancôme. Additionally, Stacy has led the team at Lippy Taylor, a New York-based agency focused on fashion and beauty clients. She has also developed and managed PR and celebrity influencer campaigns for companies such as L'Oreal and Elizabeth Arden. We also have Scott Lux, Senior Vice President of Customer Experience and Operations at NowWith. Scott has experience in e-commerce, digital strategy, performance marketing, and analytics from a brand and agency perspective. He started out as a VP of online product development for Chase, and from there moved to agency Wunderman Thompson, leading e-commerce for brands like Converse, Nordstrom, and REI. Lux has also led e-commerce for fashion brands like Diesel, Theory, and Alice & Olivia. And he's currently an adjunct professor at the Fashion Institute of Technology. This session will be moderated by Sam McFadden, TalkWalker's US Enterprise Marketing Lead. Sam helped shape marketing strategy, brand positioning, and community engagement for TalkWalker across the American market, with a focus on driving major account client acquisition. She's a seasoned digital strategist and marketer with a passion for storytelling, both professionally and personally. Prior to joining TalkWalker, Sam worked with brands including Amazon, Nordstrom, and Hilton Worldwide on digital content strategy, media planning, and branding. And with that, we'll get started. Sam, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm very excited to chat with Stacy and Scott about their experiences in the fashion beauty spaces and, of course, the kinds of developments that they've been seeing over the last year and change that are really going to shape how those spaces look in the coming years. Before we get into everything, I just have to quickly introduce a special guest star of our session, my dog Walter, aka the Chief Treat Officer in my home, may have a little background noise during the session. It's always good to call out any random barking that you may hear beforehand. So if that does occur, apologies in advance, but hopefully he will stay quiet and keep his questions to the Q&A period at the end of the session. Before we start chatting with Stacy and Scott, I'd love to give the audience a bit of background as to what we have seen at TalkWalker, a social listening platform in the fashion and beauty space over the last year. So one thing that we love to do as the social analytics and insights provider is to create industry reports across a wide range of different spaces throughout the year. So this year, we decided to do a deep dive into fashion and beauty in July. And you can see here the 5 really big talking points that we identified across all of the conversations that we were monitoring on social media and in forums like Reddit, on review sites, and other public channels this year. So obviously, COVID-19 and just general events of 2020 really led to a lot of changes across both the fashion and beauty spaces. One thing for sure is that skincare routines and general personal care products that were flying off the shelves were a lot different than they had been prior to everybody being at home. So we saw a lot more conversation uptick around skincare, SPF, and self-care routines that were really dominating conversations that prior to that had a lot more focus on makeup tutorials, different types of makeup that people could be wearing. So obviously with people spending more time inside and having a little bit more time to take care of their skin and evolve those routines from, maybe a quick 1 to 2 step to a 12-step process, myself included there. We saw a lot of an uptick in conversation around that too. And of course, lockdown had a big impact on fashion as well. So we started to see a lot more chatter around athleisure and casual wear. I like to call this the Great Jeans Rebellion of 2020. I think the last time I wore a pair of jeans was, maybe February of last year. And we started to see that represented in the overarching conversations in this space too. So consumers really started to embrace a lot of the more casual attire that had kind of been reserved for time at home when they were spending time at home. And we're continuing to see that now as people are coming out of quarantine, lockdown across the globe. People are still really, really dedicated to their athleisure wearing. So obviously that's going to be an industry trend that affects supply chains and manufacturers for some time to come. Of course, social media trends shifted a lot during the pandemic too. While there were less makeup looks that people were focused on, there was still a lot of tutorials around them that were getting shared as people were sitting at home and finding ways to occupy their time, like doing makeup, following new makeup artists. And then on the fashion side, people still continue to share a lot of the same content that they had been, now obviously with more of a casual lean. We saw outfit of the day hashtags still making the rounds, but we also saw things like mask fashions popping up and taking a lot over the conversation and the content trends that we were seeing too. There's also now an omni-channel approach that many brands and consumers alike are taking in social media and the ways that they're sharing the outfits and the beauty looks that they are putting out into the world. So things like virtual fitting rooms, digital makeup and try-on tools, all of those started to confluence last year during the time that people were unable to go to brick and mortar stores and have in-person shopping experiences. So this kind of stuff really paved the way for more virtual reality and augmented reality in both the fashion and beauty space. We'll chat a little bit about that later. And of course, influencers and celebrities are still continuing to drive a lot of conversations that we saw in fashion and beauty online. But one of the things that popped up was that there are a lot more unlikely collaborations between brands and these influencers. So with everything from product releases in video games to concerts in Fortnite, to different celebrities that in the past had not really been involved in these kind of brand campaigns, but now we're at home and we're able to do tutorials and more content that was sponsored with some of their partners. We started to see a lot of collabs pop up between companies and influencers that probably would not have occurred had we not all been in our homes and confined to one space for a long period of time. So all of these talking points are not just representative of a shift in the types of conversations that we've seen in fashion and beauty through monitoring the social media activity over the last year, but they really speak to the overarching themes that we're going to see in the fashion and beauty industries from a purchase and consumer experience perspective as well. These are two conversation clusters that were pulled from the Talkwalker platform. So essentially you can see by looking at these from the fashion and beauty spaces that there are a couple of key topics that really came out and dominated conversations. On the fashion side, obviously over the last year and change, we've seen a lot of conversations still around celebrity fashion, influencers. You see royals fashion represented here. So celebrities and influencers still did make up a solid contribution to social media conversations in fashion. It was about a little less than 60% of all the conversations overall had something to do with celebrities or influencers and what they were doing. But one thing that really started to pop out more, I think that is interesting here, are the types of platforms that people were discussing when speaking about the fashion trends that they were following. So you see fashion in TikTok here. We also see fashion in video games. So those are all new spaces that in the past we wouldn't have seen as much conversation around. I think that it really speaks to the fact that with people being at home, having to interact with each other in these new channels, that ended up spilling over into the conversations that they were having on social media about them too. So I think it's something that many communications professionals and marketers should be keeping in mind, especially working in fashion and thinking about the different crossovers that you can have between the channels that you're working on. And then from the beauty side, again, of course, we see a lot of skincare routines, makeup tutorials. There's a lot of appreciation for makeup artists in general. About 11% of the overall conversation earlier this year had to do with consumers who were speaking about the makeup artist they followed. So a lot of similar trends here to what we saw in fashion, where it's really influencer driven. We also see mention of certain brands like MAC and Bobbi Brown and Maybelline. But one thing that I think really stood out here is that about 10% of all the conversations had to do with makeup and hair tutorials for self-confidence. So it really shows that this is something that brands could be tapping into with the consumers that they're facing now. Is, you know, people aren't just thinking of hair and beauty as a way to, you know, get through the day like they may have before, but really as more of a mode of self-expression. We're really seeing that with a lot of the user-generated content that came up over the last year, and also just the ways that consumers are interacting with brands and influencers in the space online too. Speaking of user-generated content, again, we saw a lot of really interesting collaborations between influencers and brands this year. So one way that we were able to track that at Talkwalker is through our visual analytics. So the screenshot here, you can see some of the top trending pieces of user-generated content that we saw over the last year that we included in our report. So one interesting fact about this is that if you do a deep dive, you'll see that there are a couple of celebrities or big name influencers that are in here, but for the most part, these really highly shared pieces of content were from just common social media users who were taking to the internet to share their experiences with the beauty and fashion trends that they were following. And through that, we were also able to identify some specific brands that are in there. You can see that obviously some of the big name players like L'Oreal and MAC are here, but we also see people like Primark and Zara, you know, fast fashion providers that are starting to take off a little bit more now when people are looking for that cheap, comfy clothes to be wearing at home. So it really, I think, speaks to how UGC has helped these brands begin to evolve into how they are thinking about where to get in front of new consumers. So we pulled a couple of examples here from Lego and Cole Haan, who continuously have had these really interesting integrations with celebrities and influencers and other brands at that. So we have this one with Lego, where they created this whole fashion line that's had lean on the Lego iconography, which is awesome. You know, they're one of those brands that has had such a big place in our social structure over the years. You know, I certainly remember playing with Legos when I was a kid, and I've given them to friends' kids as gifts in recent years. So the fact that they, you know, kind of see in their own social experience that there's a great way to tie in with fashion to continue to build that brand message, I think really speaks to the fact that these different collaborations with influencers and consumers online have a lot of ways that they could go and different ways that brands can explore partnering with people who may not necessarily be in their space usually. And same thing here with Cole Haan. Not only did they team up with Slack to create this limited edition collab on new shoe line, but they also were working with a lot of video games like Animal Crossing to promote a lot of these products within those spaces as well. So you see not only the fact that Cole Haan was working with a tech company like Slack, getting their name more out there, but they also were using these new channels where they knew a lot of their users and consumers were now living online to promote those products as well. One of the biggest messages that we really saw in the social media conversations that we were tracking is the power that authenticity holds when it comes to engaging with your customers. So this example from Huda Beauty is perfect to elaborate on this a little bit. Huda Beauty started with Huda, the influencer, who began a YouTube channel with makeup tutorials. It's blossomed into one of the most successful and largest beauty brands worldwide. And one of the things that is really good to note about how they approach engaging with their customers online is that they really embrace this authentic message behind it and really showcase, especially how their founder is able to look past a lot of the images that people are seeing online and tap into that need to be authentic with their customers. So for a little bit of context, you can see over on the left side of the page, or excuse me, the right side of the page, we have some results from the mentions of Huda Beauty's posts across their social channels. So on the bottom right, we have the volume of the actual results in terms of what they were posting, when they were posting, how many people were liking it. And you can see that the Instagram is pretty low. They aren't usually posting on Instagram. It isn't their main channel for getting in front of people. They have a lot more posts going up on Twitter, on Facebook, and even YouTube. However, if you look just above that at the circle graph, you'll see that 98.9% of the engagement that Huda Beauty gets is through their Instagram posts. So this is really the space where their founder is able to speak directly to consumers. And you can see that in the example on the left side of the screen where they did a split screen between a real photo and a fake photo that's been edited for cosmetic purposes. And again, you know, this was one of their most engaged pieces within the last year. And it really speaks to the fact that customers are looking for that core messaging of authenticity when they are looking not just at your products, but also at your branding and your messaging behind them. So making sure that you're always staying true to that and tapping into that need from your customers is going to help you get more engagement out of them and really set the playing field for you to have a hold in their lives as well. One of the biggest emerging consumer needs that we identified in our reporting is this advent of AR and virtual experiences in fashion and in beauty alike. So this is a theme cloud that we pulled from the Talkwalker platform that looks at conversation around the idea of augmented reality in this space. So you can see once you start looking at some of the other comments surrounding AR here that it's pretty positive. It's a lot of people who are talking about improved customer experience, improved shopping experience. There are people who discuss how it ends up reducing return rates because they're able to see how they would look in clothes before they actually receive them. So that again improves their shopping experience. We also saw posts from people who were excited about being able to share pictures of them in these try-on makeup looks or fashion looks with their friends so that they could get feedback from them directly. So not only are we seeing AR and VR building a purpose within these industries because of things like COVID and quarantine, but it also shows the long-term effect that this can have on consumers who are able to interact a little bit more with some of these brands that they previously may have only been able to work with in person, but also improves it from the brand perspective as well when you're reducing return rates and improving your customer experience. These are all things that are going to give you a lot more leverage with that customer base going forward too. Another big emerging consumer need that we're going to discuss a little bit later today is sustainable supply chains. So this is the key sentiment drivers that we looked at when looking specifically at secondhand clothing marketplaces within the last year. We started to see a lot more conversation blossom around those spaces, specifically like trading platforms like Vinted, Poshmark, and Depop. People were discussing these a lot more frequently online. So we dug into the sentiment around it. And really the reason why people are tuning into these secondhand clothing stores is they're looking for more sustainable ways to experience fashion. So not only just from the supply chain perspective of looking at manufacturing practices and source supplies and things like that, but also thinking about the quality of clothing, the longevity of clothing, kind of moving away from the fast fashion aesthetic that we've had for several years now and looking more into how they can make more sustainable choices as consumers too. You can see that represented in the sentiment drivers here as well. You know, we have the things that are highest in that green area on the right being around high quality, good deals, online selection. And then if you look even at the things that are a little bit more neutral, you're still seeing these positive aspects of it, like vegan leather, genuine leather, special prices. So it's all things that people are really looking into from the buying mindset too, of, you know, wanting to know where the clothing that they're purchasing is coming from, but also wanting to make sure that it's going to last and be sustainable, not just from the perspective of how it was created, but also how it's being worn too. And with that background info, I am going to pass the mic over to Stacy Mackler. She's our first speaker of the day. Obviously, fashion and beauty spaces are ever evolving, and the data shows that the trends have taken hold over the past few years, are going to affect us for some time to come. So, Stacy, I would love to hear a little bit about you and your experience in the beauty industry, and what has led to what you're working on today.
Thanks so much, Sam. I have to tell you, it's so weird not being in front of a bunch of people and talking to you guys and just seeing these numbers on a screen. I wish I could stand up and make a fool out of myself in front of all of you in person, as I've done for so many years, but I'll have to do it online, I guess. As Sam so kindly mentioned, I've spent the last 25 years in the beauty industry, both on the agency and the corporate side. On the corporate side, most recently, I spent over 6.5 years as the head of PR and communications for Lancôme at L'Oreal. And prior to that, I was on the brand side, also as the head of global communications at Clinique. Through that, I've also worked with small agencies in the city that are very beauty focused, and larger agencies in New York that are interested in more CPG focused, but more interested in developing fashion and beauty, MSNL Group being one of them of note. So it's been, it's been really interesting to be on both sides of the business, on the client side and the brand side. And I think it's, a fascinating time to be in beauty because while we've weathered recessions and the lipstick index that Mr. Lauder so famously coined many, many years ago, we always bounce back to during a recession. COVID has posed some really interesting moments in time. But notably, nothing we haven't been talking about. I think it just accelerates a lot of the strategies that beauty brands have been talking about the need to get behind for many, many years. And now, it's like, okay, now it's really time to step it up and make sure that these things happen in a very quick and efficient way. And, obviously our changes in lifestyle, to your point, Sam, I try not to wear jeans because I don't know about you, but I've put on a few during COVID. So I'm happy to go with this athleisure wear. But, our desire to get dressed up and go out and put on makeup and all of those things that we did so easily and normally before aren't quite the same. Although when I have the opportunity, I definitely grab it by the horns and go for it. The whole Roaring 20s discussion, I think there's a lot of reality based in that, and I miss, putting on makeup and going out. But at the same time, it's also nice to have the time to take care of myself. And we're all doing things in beauty that we didn't do before. We're not going to nail salons anymore, so we're learning to give ourselves manicures at home. We're not getting our hair colored, so we're going to the drugstore and finding color in a box and doing things that maybe necessarily we wouldn't have done before. Skincare, whether it's maskne or whether it's just the time to take care of your skin, whether it's on your face or your body, we're paying much more attention to that. I mean, we've seen the infiltration of masks and Korean beauty and all of this over the past few years, but now again, the maskne thing has become a real issue, and just the ability to take a little bit more time for self-care. And I think this slap in the face that, hey, life is short and we don't know what's going to happen, and so we're going to take a little bit more time to ourselves and take care of ourselves. So all of these are very interesting kind of overarching propositions to talk further about where COVID's taking us. But I have a real interest in TalkWalker's done such a great job of, the social listening research and going through it and understanding where the changes are taking place. It's, from an industry side and from a consumer side, and developing strategies that hit on both. I think we all have our work cut out for us, but I think that there's also a tremendous opportunity across areas that I'm not sure we thought we were ready to delve into yet.
Yeah, those are great points. I have to say, I bought a pair of jeans over the weekend and put them in my drawer and have yet to actually wear them anywhere. So I'm right there. And I think you bring up some really good points in the fact that, while these are things that maybe would have been accelerated by COVID, there are kind of underlying factors in the beauty industry at large that had been lurking in the corners and just kind of came into the light once we all had to really shift our perspective and our day-to-day mindset around beauty and personal care. So I'm curious, with that in mind, are there key ways that you've really seen brands trying to connect in new ways or sell to their core customers, understanding this new normal, and how are they going about doing that? What kind of tactics are you seeing?
Definitely. And, I have to say my time at L'Oreal, it was really so fruitful, and L'Oreal got behind the consumer journey very early on. And I think one of the most interesting things, and it's specific, but I think it's very relative on a more macro scale, is the idea of customization, right? We've been talking about the decline of department stores and the challenges they faced for many, many years. But they've still managed to hold their own, and in a big way, and they're still selling beauty products and fashion products to consumers. But one of the big things is like with the entree of Sephora and certainly what we've seen with Ulta over the last couple of years, how do retail environments create a really unique experience for their customers, where the customers, Sephora, it's that one-to-one, that selling point where you've got a cast member that's there, that's assisting you with the things that you want to try and sell. And it's a different model than a department store, and Ulta has also done a good job with that. So how do, bigger retailers, and how do we move forward with that sort of unique experience in store and that customization? And one of the things that I was part of a pilot for that L'Oreal did back we started it, I think, in 2016. It was a custom makeup foundation technology, and this technology platform L'Oreal took to a whole new level. Lancôme was the pilot brand for it, and it was all about the fact that you could go in, or anybody in the audience, you could go into a store, and we started at Nordstrom, and you could have your shade matched for your perfect foundation. And look, if it's cold out and our skin is red, or if it's summertime and we have a tan, and anybody out there that has bought foundation knows, it doesn't matter how good you are, it's so hard to match your skin tone. And what this technology did was, you sat down, we could match up to 20,000 skin tones. And not only that, but the whole experience was very bespoke and specific to the consumer. You were with, a makeup artist from the brand for 15 minutes talking about anything you wanted to talk about, and it was usually makeup or beauty oriented. And not only that, but you were given the product. You could choose whether you wanted a matte or a dewy finish. You got your name on the product. The product had a batch number that you could eventually order online. So it was this real personal one-to-one moment, and it developed a relationship with the beauty advisor. It created a foundation shade that was just for you, and you walked out feeling like, wow, you have this fancy box, this beautiful, product that actually wasn't really any more expensive than the brand's, higher level of foundation shade in terms of cost. And it was that unique one-to-one customized experience. And so, while a company like L'Oreal that has started that early on, those customization trends are things that we're seeing in the future, that we're seeing, pre-COVID, and that we're obviously seeing more and more post-COVID, and in different ways, because not everybody wants to walk into the store, not everybody wants anyone to touch them, and not everybody has the opportunity to try the different products that they used to be able to try. So it's adapting to those, both from the industry side and the consumer side. But I think that customization, it's something we've been talking about for a long time, and that in-store experience, that retail experience, that product experience. And now, how do you promote that even more online than, we were trying to do in the past? And it's customized chats, and it's, Q&As online to figure out which kind of products are right for you. But I think brands and companies are looking to take that to the next level.
I mean, you bring up such an interesting point about companies like Sephora and Ulta, who are kind of coming in and shaking up the game a little bit. But then I also think about, D2C brands like Glossier that came on the scene and now kind of are setting the standard for how a lot of beauty brands are getting in front of new customers and providing their products. So I think that leads to another really good question is, obviously the pandemic has shifted how people are purchasing and where they're doing it, and that might have had a really big impact on a lot of the customer loyalty that a lot of these brands were counting on. How do you think the pandemic has impacted or changed those values that customers are looking for from the brands that they typically shop for? Is it specifically experience oriented? Is it, the types of products that people are looking for now?
I think you make great points on all those facts, Sam. I think that, we've been seeing the uptick in clean beauty, which is, it's a hard road to pave, and some companies have done it really, really well already. That is obviously becoming more and more important. Safety is a huge issue now, right? Since COVID, things that we didn't think about before with a large company or a small company in terms of how packaging and fulfillment, and to your point, supply chain, like how is all that managed? Those safety issues are huge. I think there's still a lot of trust in brands that we know and love and have used for a long time. And I think your iconic brands like Lancôme and Clinique in particular will, continue to keep their loyal customers. I also think though that value propositions have changed for consumers in general over COVID, right? There is a sense of roaring 20s, hedonism, go do things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily do because tomorrow you might be locked up for almost a year and you may not be able to enjoy it. But there's also, I think we're still sticking with that fashion high-low, and maybe I'm using a Lancôme foundation and I'm using a L'Oreal Paris lipstick, or maybe I'm using, an indie brand and then I'm using a prestige brand that I know and that I trust. So I think that people are looking at that a little bit more. I think also people, and again, we saw this, I worked very closely with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital with Lancôme for a long time and very intricately. I think the CSR, I think consumers want to know that brands are giving back and that they're doing something to make the world better. I think that they focus more, like I said, on this ethical and safety issue. And, are these brands being cautious, and what precautions are they taking to make sure that the products are safe and not contaminated? And so I think there's a little bit more of a focus there than ever. And then there's movement, right? Like how many people do you know that have left New York City and gone to like a small town in Maine? Or, there's so much movement, so priorities shift when that happens, right? Because you don't have access to, and listen, I'm all for a small town in Maine and I've lived in New York for 26 years, but there's lots of things that shift when you go to maybe a more rural area and you come from a more urban area. You don't have access to the same kind of products or the same resources. So, what happens to your priorities and what happens to your preferences? And are you more likely to try something that's clean, that's homegrown, that's in your local backyard, that's a skincare product that is efficacious and it's safe? And, so those mindsets are changing. So brands are going to have to understand like how best to reach their consumer, I think, based on a lot of these different things. But I think it's a super interesting time to be in beauty and fashion. And I think, again, it's just putting the pedal to the metal, I guess, as they say in race car driving, about things that we were looking at before, omnichannel approaches, more clean beauty, responsibility, figuring out supply chain in a more efficient way. It's just now being pushed to the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up such a great point about, the availability of a lot of these products now, and the fact that a lot of brands and customers alike have to think a little bit more about how they're getting items that may not be as accessible with people being home, but also people moving away from cities to get a little bit more of that space and freedom. So thinking about that and the ways that brands are reacting to those new kind of needs, I'd love to wrap up this section just kind of asking you to put your communications thinking cap back on for a little bit, and thinking about when it comes to crisis management for beauty brands who, to your point, may be facing some new questions from customers around sustainable practices or manufacturing. How can brands really ensure that they're staying on top of that public image and address those problems before they start to affect their sales? Whether they're seeing them crop up in review sites or maybe on social media commentary, what would be your top tip for really helping those brands to make sure that they are putting their best foot forward?
I think the lesson I learned in 2001 with the World Trade Center collapse and living in New York and understanding how all of that unfolded and living at ground zero, I think that was actually a really big lesson for me in crisis communications. And I've been able to apply it throughout in my career, but it always comes down to the same thing. And whether it's animal testing, it's, product effectiveness, it's claims, the best thing is get in front of it and just own it. The Red Cross didn't do such a great job September 11, 2001, and the media skewered them. And you know what? I give them tons of credit because they stood up and said, we haven't handled this right, and we're going to turn it around and we're going to fix it. And any type of crisis communication situation I've been in the past, whether it be for celebrities, products, claims, you name it, if there's something to own and be responsible for, it's step up, own it, and say how you're going to fix it. And with the emergence of social media, I can tell you we saw it all the time. And it was a real learning, because with social media, it was like, that is a platform for consumers to communicate. You can't delete a comment that you don't like because somebody said something bad about the brand, right? And most of the time, unless it was something really notable, it was a situation of, we just let them have their forum. We let the consumers have their place to talk and discuss what they wanted to talk. If it was a really big issue, if it was animal testing, if it was something about one of our ambassadors, if it was political, obviously if there was something to address, the brand addressed it as it was appropriate. But I think that honesty is always the best way to handle it. Own what may have gone wrong or did go wrong, and then offer your consumers the opportunity to fix it, send them an alternate product, what have you. But hiding behind it, ignoring it, pretending it didn't happen, pretending those aren't your policies, those things, they just don't ever work. And I've seen it over and over again in all different kinds of verticals, and beauty is definitely no exception.
Yeah, my thoughts too. I think it goes back to that point about authenticity that we discussed a little bit earlier, that whether it's good or bad, stand behind your product and, work from whatever learnings you can get from your customers along the way.
1,000%.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Stacy. This was an amazing conversation. And anyone who's in the audience, please feel free to drop your questions for Stacy in the chat, and we'll get those over to her after we hear from Scott. And Stacy, thank you so much again. This was great insights.
Oh, thank you. And go ahead, guys. Ask me all the questions you want. I'm ready for you.
All right. So shifting gears a little bit, let us bring Scott up to the mic. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today and bringing a little bit of your beauty insights to our session.
Sure, no problem. Happy to be here. I would say my insights are more on the fashion side. I'll leave the beauty aspect to Stacy. She covered that quite well.
Yes,
but
yeah.
my background on fashion, commerce, and customer experience. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So speaking of, would you be so kind as to give us a little bit of information about your background and the experiences you've had in the fashion industry and how that's shaped your role with Now With today?
Yeah, no, fantastic. Similar approach to Stacy. I kind of started my digital career way back in the day, first .com boom with a couple of startups in Seattle, but kind of cut my teeth, for lack of a better word, on the agency side, working for Wunderman Thompson. And I think one of the great things I took away from Wunderman Thompson, which started as a small agency back in the day called Zaz, was we were one of the very first agencies to look at data and analytics first, and then what are we trying to solve and how do we measure that problem or challenge. And that's kind of stuck with me throughout my career. And I think, as Stacy alluded to, it's probably one of the most exciting times to be in the retail or commerce or brand space, but I would say one of the most challenging times as well. We'll talk about where I think data fits into that. But kind of had the opportunity on the agency side to catch this wave when I moved to New York after we were acquired by WPP. You started to see this transition. You had the bigger brands, your Nikes of the world, they had been commerce enabled for a while. But in 2008 or 2009, you started to see this emergence of a lot of brands for the first time take commerce seriously. And I had the opportunity to build out commerce teams for Diesel, John Barbados, Intermix, and most recently working with Andrew Rosen on Theory and Allison Olivia. And over the last probably 2-3 years, like everyone probably joining us today, this massive shift that we've seen with influencer economy. And I think the greatest parallel I can strike that to is, to me, influencers have become today's modern sales associate. And that's what captivated me to look at what Now With is doing as a startup, because one of the areas we always wanted to focus on the retail side, what is the right blend of influencer? How do you dip your toes into influencer marketing? And we kept coming back to the same notion. Our sales associates and people in store are the best ambassadors of the brand. They know the product inside and out. how can we kind of turn them into influencers in their own right? A lot of them already are. We saw at Intermix as an example. Some of our sales associates had 20 to 40,000 followers, passionate followers. The challenge for brands is it's not scalable. So I started to see that and made the move over to NowWith. So we're an early stage startup that really empowers creators to become their own retailers and control commerce for the first time. So if you look at all the platforms that are out there today, most of them were built around advertising and brand first. Very, very few of them were built with the creator in mind. And our whole tenet or premise is to make it easy for creators to make any video or content shoppable on their social channels through what we're calling the world's first universal social commerce platform. So we allow creators to continue to share brands that they love with their followers. But the difference is you can seamlessly purchase through our unified shopping cart across channels and across platform, and then bring that data and insight back to the creators, as well as the connection points with brands that they're sharing and talking about.
That's very cool. And I think it really brings up the fact that customers are looking for new ways to connect with brands, but also introductions to new brands too, especially in digital spaces. And I think it brings me to a question I had for you actually. Obviously 2020, we saw a huge shakeup with brick and mortar retailers, in-person experiences were kind of taken off the plate. Now that you're working in this space that really focuses more on that digital connection that brands that maybe have been operating in more traditional spaces with in-person experiences are now able to connect with customers. What other ways do you think that some of these brands can really start to embrace the digital space and use it to leverage the channels that they have available to them there now that this is kind of a new way for them to get in front of customers?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things, and some of them honestly are kind of the basics. I do have to disclose that I'm still, for a lot of my friends out there in the community, I'm still a big believer in physical retail. It has a relevant space. I just think that a lot of brands haven't kept up or evolved, and I love what Stacy was talking about, whether it's Sephora, some of the work she's done with L'Oreal. I think that's definitely headed in the right direction. But I think for brands to truly succeed in digital, you really have to start looking at it across the tenets of experience design and mapping out, as a brand, how do we kind of want to show up in the world and represent ourselves to our customers, and understanding experience design spans across digital, physical, and people. And I think you have to start moving in that direction and embracing kind of that core concept. And that a lot of times is challenging for brands, because it could mean we have to restructure how we're set up organizationally, shifting dollars and shifting levels of investment and scaling those up or down as needed. So I think that's the first step. The second one is to really understand kind of segmentation. And I know that may sound very straightforward and easy, but almost every brand I've worked with still has that core challenge. It's like, okay, we have this segment that we want to protect and defend, that's our core customer, and we may know a little bit about them, but they still struggle how to speak to them in the right way. And then we have these other audiences. Let's go after a younger generation, is what I heard for the longest time, because you saw just this explosion of social channels. I mean, TikTok, as an example, crossed 1 billion monthly users faster than any other platform in history. So brands tend to knee-jerk and say, okay, let's go after a younger audience. But I think you really have to look at your segmentation audience strategy first to understand where are the growth opportunities, and then building in journeys and personas that will elicit that right behavior. Because I do believe, while we're all very immersed in digital, you alluded to it, Sam, discovery, a ton of discovery happens through Instagram. But I'll ask friends or colleagues or a younger generation, okay, so how many of you are actually using swipe up to shop or shopping from Instagram stories? Some will play around with it, but it is that discovery moment. A lot of people still like going into physical retail, or you may pop over to your laptop, place the order later, or build your basket in your cart and start adding items throughout the day and throughout the week, and then edit it at a later point. So long way of saying that to really get to that digital activation, what that looks at, you have to look at holistically from an experience design perspective across both your physical and digital presence, and then the role of kind of humans within that. And that means your sales associates, influencers you're partnering with, and your own team. And then second, understand segmentation and your core audiences and mapping out each customer journey and what path you think that'll be, and then solve those challenges along the way.
Yeah, definitely. It totally makes sense. And personally, I can't say I've purchased anything from a swipe up on Instagram, but I definitely am getting ever more targeted ads in my grid feed, which honestly have introduced me to so many new products over the last couple of years. It's really interesting innovation that we're seeing here. How have the increase in social shopping and features on social media platforms that allow for more shopping and more of these kind of one-click paths to purchase affected the consumer life cycle overall? I'm really interested to hear, how that kind of new mindset of everything at your fingertips, being able to create multiple shopping carts across the buying landscape, just based off of the kind of things that you're seeing come up on your newsfeed. How have you really seen that affect, what the path to purchase and consumer life cycle is like for fashion brands?
Yeah, I think, honestly, it hasn't changed a lot. I mean, consumer behavior has, but I still think the life cycle is still relatively similar, right? Like you want to discover new products, and where you had that discovery has changed. So I always use my example back when I lived in Seattle before we had access, or a lot of brands, quite frankly, weren't online. You would go to Nordstrom or Barney's back in the day, and you would rely on the edit and curation they had in that department store for that discovery. Now, as you alluded to, and we've talked through, discovery still happens. It's just happening through Instagram, people you're following, different conversations. It could be marketing touch points through paid media that you're encountered with. So I think the channels have changed and where discovery or purchase ends up happening, but that flow is still the same. The other point that I did want to call out is where I've seen the bigger shift, and what I led the conversation is it's become much, much harder for brands, right? Because historically, you could try to push the customer into whatever channel you want them to transact. So it's like, okay, early 2000s, let's drive them to store, drive them to call, or you had even catalog brands back in the day. Then you started to say, okay, well, we're omni, so let's drive them to both channels. But again, looking at it through the lens of the customer, what's really changed, it's just that sense of immediacy. So they want to be able to make a purchase, have that discovery kind of happen on their own terms. And that could be within social, could be walking into retail, it could be discovering through another piece of content. You could be watching a really cool Netflix show on TV and actually want to shop it there. So I think there's a lot of manifestations on how that shows up. The bigger challenge is how do brands and retailers actually participate in those channels? And I think there's three dramatic shifts that I want to call out that I think are making this challenging, but also a good opportunity. So one, obviously, we all know about iOS 14, but it has had dramatic impacts on brands. There's two news articles over the last month that caught my attention. One around Casper, buried in their notice. They've done a round of layoffs, unfortunately, a couple months back, but they kind of alluded to part of that was around digital marketing, cost of rising media, and iOS 14. Facebook, same thing in their news release. So it's really hard for brands now. Cost of media has skyrocketed to actually target customers. They're having to rely much more on first-party data and then discovering ways that they can kind of unlock that potential. And I think that's where the opportunity bleeds into social commerce and taking control of their own destiny with that data.
Absolutely. And I think we're just going to continue to see that social commerce, as we're coining it, grow and grow over the years as more platforms like TikTok and who even knows what'll come after it are picking up steam.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it's just because that's where so many people are spending their time. And I think some of it's pandemic related, some of it, I mean, obviously a lot of it is, but a lot of it's here to stay. I was reading an article this morning, just the way content is set up. And I think we should start breaking apart how we talk about these platforms, because in my mind, TikTok's not a social channel or social platform. It's a content platform. I was reading an article this morning, like the NBA, I think, has one of the strongest adoption rates in TikTok, and it's primarily because it's made for highlights. It's snackable content. So I think that's where we need to start thinking about this whole content paradigm, and then where does that come into play versus kind of the social commentary aspect, and where is that happening? So yeah, so commerce really, I think social commerce will probably be an overused buzzword, but I think it's just this notion that commerce, and it's back to the old omni paradigm, really commerce can happen anywhere at this point. And that's what the consumer expects, is it just needs to be easy when they decide they want to make that purchase.
Yeah, it makes sense. Just put your product at everybody's fingertips, right?
Yeah, and I mean that exactly, because it could be, again, going into physical retail and having that product available, or if it's not in stock, I mean, that's kind of the truest form of omnichannel. If it's not in stock, how can I get access to it? So maybe you're sold out of my size, but I really like it. How can you get that to me in a matter of hours, if not a day, depending on where you are?
Absolutely. Well, great food for thought here. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate all the insights about this. And I know it's certainly got my wheels turning about how I find new clothing brands and where I'm shopping too. I think with that, we can start to wrap up our speaker section. We've got about 7 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to pass it back over to Ian, and we'll bring both Scott and Stacy back and take a couple of questions from the audience. And Scott, thank you so much again. This was great, and I think it definitely gave people a lot of good insights into the future of e-com in the fashion space.
Great, happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Sam, for that terrific presentation earlier, and Stacy and Scott for that informative discussion. So we have time for about 2 questions before we wrap up. Stacy, first one is for you. Can you talk to me about how brands can leverage nano influencers in the beauty space to expand their digital presence with new audiences?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. In 2015, 2016, 2017, you know, at L'Oreal, we were looking at the influencer explosion, and L'Oreal owning natively digital brands like Urban Decay and NYX, it was easy to say, okay, like, let's do what they're doing. They've got it right. But when you're a brand like Lancôme, you're a totally different brand. And one size does not fit all when it comes to influencers or social strategies. And over the years in developing the influencer strategy, the easy, you know, the low-hanging fruit was the high-hanging fruit, in the sense that the obvious were your big name influencers that had sort of already made it. Interestingly, I met one of our best influencers, Camila Coelho, when she had I think she probably had under 100,000 influencers at the time. She was what we'd consider now a micro influencer, but she had all the right sort of checked boxes for the brand, right? She had the right look, her aesthetic was right, her personality was right, her engagement was good. She kind of ticked all these boxes, and you know, I look at her now and I'm so proud of her, and she's got almost 10 million followers, and she's still very loyal to Lancôme. I think she knows that the brand put a lot of, you know, faith behind her early on. That being said, over the years we also switched gears, and obviously the top tier and those celebrity social influencers were still important, but we looked at, like, who were these up and comers? Who were some of these micro influencers that checked off the boxes that we set, the parameters that we needed for the brand, that could grow with us and become, brand ambassadors for us in different ways. And I think it's really important to look at these micro influencers and to understand where you can build these relationships. And that's the win. And maybe it's the PR comms person in me, but the win is really where you establish these relationships and you see the ROI. Camilla was a great example. It was like one post during a trip, and that was the agreement, and would get 10 or 15 out of her, and we'd get an unboxing on YouTube, and she helped us open our Snapchat channel. And so it's these relationships, and you get there early and you get with these micro influencers, and that's how so many of them started. I think it's really understanding what fits your brand, what fits your strategy, and the kinds of relationships that you take the time and the effort to develop. And even if it's a handful of them out of 100, I think that can go a really long way at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And Scott, we have a question for you about communicating social good. So when beginning to address emerging social concerns among consumers, such as more inclusive products or sustainable manufacturing, what can brands do to communicate authenticity in their messaging and not appear as if they're pandering?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the best way to do that is, one, you have to be genuine from the start. I think it is really, really tough to kind of make that pivot, because as the person that submitted the question alluded to, you have to be authentic, and today's consumers are too smart and know that. So I think it's how you show up as a brand, looking at supply chain. Can you back that up? I think Gap has made significant progress, not only in supply chain, sourcing of their product, especially on Athleta being one of the largest sustainable B Corps that are out there, as well as that they were talking about diversity and inclusion well before other brands were. So I think it's looking at their history and track record of it. And I think the second piece, if you look at brands like Patagonia, they've kept it core to their DNA, and they really aren't afraid of being open and transparent about it. And I think that's the tricky part for brands that they have to land on. Is this truly a core tenet of us and how we want to be known as a brand? And if so, you may have to put profits and revenue as a secondary component when you're talking about whether it's sustainability or getting into diversity and inclusion. And I think the last piece is just making sure that you are taking steps, maybe not talking about it too far ahead of the time. I think I've seen a lot of brands that'll do just one little part of sustainability, whether it's with packaging, and it just opens up a slew of other conversations. So it's really picking that lane and doing that well, and then talking about it after you get kind of some traction with where you're trying to accomplish.
All right, and we have one last question for either of you to take. It's about beauty and fragrance sampling. Are you able to share some ideas on how digital tools can help power beauty and fragrance sampling?
Stacy, I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, I think, with digital tools in terms of fragrance sampling, I think it's tough. The blow-ins and the different marketing innovations that we have done as an industry into magazines. So that's when you the scratch and sniff, if you will. Those are obviously super highly effective. I'd be curious to see, with all the AR that's coming out now and with companies like Perfect, what can be done on that level. I think anytime that we've tried to do it from a virtual and digital perspective with fragrance sampling, you focus on the notes of the fragrance, the top notes of the fragrance, and try to create an experience. And maybe it's through AR. So if you've got a top note of iris, then maybe there's an AR moment where you're running through a virtual field of iris, and you feel the experience there, and you can imagine the notes of the iris and how that comes about through different layering of ingredients. I think fragrances is a tough one when it comes to digital, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how we get our way around it. So that was me just brainstorming. I'm not sure how that would really work, but that's sort of what came to me, in the short term. But it's a great question, because I think that there's a long way to go when it comes to fragrance and digital. I mean, celebrities we know work. I look at Julia Roberts for La Vie Belle, and there's a lot of people in the US that don't feel comfortable saying the name of the brand, and they buy it because Julia Roberts uses it. So, and Julia Roberts was one of the creators of the brand, and she's the face of the fragrance. So we know that works, and so clearly she's part of our digital campaign, whether it would be through social or digital marketing aspects or CRM. So that's another thing that, has worked in the past that I would imagine would be amped up as we move further into, the depths of the digital world and digital and e-com.
In my completely unprofessional view of this, because I definitely don't have as much experience as you, Stacy, I personally took a personality quiz at Le Labo's website last week that was based off my MBTI, I think, which was the first time I've ever done that for a fragrance selection. So, we'll see if I just end up getting Santal recommended to me, like everyone. But that was the first time I really had a virtual fragrance experience. It was really interesting.
Yeah, things like that are great. I mean, in Europe, they do a lot of in-store where you can go in and you can take a quiz, and they have you smell some different things. So, and then they formulate something or they just tell you kind of what might be best. But yeah, I mean, the quizzes are a good start, Sam. I think you bring up a great point, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves in beauty for sure. So whoever asked that question, it's a great one, and I'm going to do my homework on it.
All right, well, we will wrap there. Thank you, Stacy, Scott, and Sam for your insights today. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening and submitting their questions, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Sam.